My name is Frank, and I was born in a small town called Nizza Monferrato, which is situated in the northwest of Italy, and it is relatively famous for its wines. So, my parents are from China, and since I grew up in Italy, the majority of my friends were Italian, and also because there weren't many Chinese people in my hometown. Whenever I met some Chinese person, I will feel some sort of connection, and the conversation will naturally start. In those cases, there weren't any sort of language barrier or cultural differences. So, in other words, there has always been a good relationship within the Chinese community. After living for 17 years in Italy, I then moved to a couple of countries in Latin America, including Colombia, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. And in there, I could still feel the same kind of connection within the Chinese community. So, when I first came to the University of Washington, I was excited to meet other people from my same ethnicity. Unfortunately, the situation was not the same as I expected. During the first days, when I tried to initiate some conversation with some Chinese students, at least half of them neglected me and consequently ignored me. After those events, I became curious about what could have been the reason behind their behavior. I started thinking that there might be a barrier between Chinese Americans and native Chinese students. But at that time, I didn't have anything that gave me the opportunity, or rather that deeply motivated me to start such research. Fortunately, during the winter quarter, thanks to this English class, I had the opportunity to do an ethnographic project, and moreover, I could choose my own topic. So, given the chance, I started conducting my research. I decided to gather information about both communities, so I had three main objectives. The first one was to confirm the existence of a barrier between the two groups, while my second objective was to gather information about the two groups and possibly discover the reasons behind such barrier. And my final and third goal was to raise awareness about this topic that has seemingly been ignored for a period of time, and therefore clarify any possible misunderstandings between those two communities and harboring a closer relationship between them. So, I started my project by conducting background research, and to gather further data, I directly interviewed people from both communities. The results were as initially expected, but at the same time they were quite surprising. In terms of friendships, out of every 10 friends, native Chinese students have about 7 or 8 Chinese international students, and 2 or 3 Chinese Americans as friends, while Chinese Americans have about 8 or 9 Chinese American friends and only 1 or 2 native Chinese friends. Based on these statistics, it is pretty clear that both groups prefer to socialize with people from their same community. However, this would be an educated guess, so I wanted to gather more relevant data. And another question that I asked them was if they would prioritize their own group over the other. And surprisingly, Chinese American friends do prioritize their own community, while native Chinese students do not. This was quite the opposite of what I expected, so I proceeded and asked more questions about the reasons behind such decisions. And the explanations that both groups gave me were all centered on three main reasons, which are language barrier, cultural and background differences, and relatability and comfortability. The three reasons are certainly interconnected with each other. As for relatability and comfortability are an outcome of cultural and background differences. It is natural that students that grew up in the same country will have more similarities and therefore feel more related and prefer to socialize with each other. This was a topic that has been shared by both groups. However, the major problem was the language barrier. Interviewees from both groups told me that they were more proficient and preferred to speak in either Chinese or English, but not both. The lack of fluency in either language produced uncomfortable situations, and therefore it was pretty difficult to establish a friendship with people who preferred to communicate in another mother tongue. And at the end, by combining the three factors together, I concluded that the principal issue is that both Chinese Americans and Chinese international students have many misperceptions about each other. Additionally, the stereotypes that both communities have about each other contributed even more to the division between them. However, since this is all a result of a lack of communication between the two groups, there is a simple or easy solution, and that would be the case if there were a single Chinese student organization instead of two individual organizations where both Chinese Americans and Chinese international students were part of it. In that way, they will be able to communicate more with each other and there will be a higher chance of clarifying all the misunderstandings and therefore build up a more unified community.